Hi and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Teresa Cow and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Stephen Pines. And we are super excited to share with you guys our topic today about navigating codependency in relationships. But before we get started, I wanted to give you guys a brief background about both Stephen and myself and where we're coming from, and also to just go over a few logistical items. So I currently work at Mission Hospital in the Adolescent Intensive Outpatient Program called Aspire, and also the Young Adult Intensive Outpatient Program called Vibe. And Dr. Pines also works for Saddleback College as well in the counseling program. And so we have joined forces today to bring to you guys this webinar on behalf of the Vibe program, the Young Adult Intensive Outpatient Program. So the VIBE program essentially is a program that assists young adults ages 18 to 26 in the community who are struggling more so with their mental health and needs more support than just, once a week therapy. And so we provide anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week of services for these young adults in the community. And a part of this VIBE program is we also offer these free webinars monthly to you all in the community, mostly geared towards young adults, but we do have a lot of other like mental health providers that join us for each webinar as well. So welcome everyone if this is your first time, and welcome back to those who are recurring attendees. We're glad to have you guys here again. Before we jump in a little bit more, just a few housekeeping items. So first, this is a one-directional webinar. That means that you all are able to see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. And so the only way to communicate with us and interact with us is through the chat box. So I would encourage you guys to do that if you guys have any questions. If you want to participate in the discussion or have comments, please feel free to use the chat box, and we will be checking it regularly to respond to you all throughout the webinar, okay? Also, we do have, you guys probably saw in the flyer, is that we have a raffle for 10 lucky winners who participate to the very end, meaning that you're going to stay with us to the end of the webinar. It'll probably be about an hour or so, and complete the webinar survey at the very end. It's only 1 or 2 questions. It'll take you 30 seconds max. And if you're able to do that, you'll be in the running for a $25 Amazon gift card. So be sure not to miss out on that. And then the last thing is our next webinar for next month will be on August 11th at 12 o'clock. So same day, Wednesday at 12 noon on August 11th, and we will be sending out the registration link to all of your emails as well. And it's going to be on emotional intelligence. So hopefully you guys can join us for that as well. Let me check. I think someone just tried to chat here real quick. Oh, perfect. Hi, Lisa, to you. Okay, so let's jump in. So this topic we thought would be super relevant, especially to the young adult population. Codependency is in many of our relationships, and it's not just, in romantic relationships. We experience it in working relationships, family relationships, friendships even. And especially during young adulthood, we find this as a common pattern. And as you guys all know, during young adulthood, it's a very complex developmental stage of life where you're experiencing several different life demands, right? Like you're trying to figure out who you are as a person, you're trying to figure out like a sense of self and what's your purpose in life and all of that existential stuff, right? While all at the same time trying to figure out also establishing relationships with other people, whether friendships, long-term romantic relationships. And so when those two tasks are happening at the same time, sometimes it can get really complex and really confusing. And sometimes when we're not sure about who we are as people quite yet, and we enter into these relationships, a lot of times it can feel like our relationships are our identity, right? And it's hard to know how to separate ourselves apart from that. And so that can get really confusing, really complex, and develop these codependent traits. And so what we're going to talk to you guys about today basically is what codependency is all about, how it develops over time. A lot of times it kind of stems from, when we're younger. And then we'll talk about just different traits and like kind of red flags, things, signs to look out for in relationships, or things that are characteristic of codependency. And then we'll also talk about, how to break the cycle in some ways, how to know what healthy relationships look like. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up the presentation, okay? So let's dive right in. Let's see here. Okay, so I don't know if many of you guys know, but codependency, the term that as we know it now isn't necessarily how it was coined way back when. So historically, this concept of codependency actually stems from addictions work. So individuals who had addictions typically had loved ones who were trying to, support them and help them through their addiction, but inadvertently would essentially, reinforce or enable their addictions or like codependent traits, and the more that person would depend on them for support in their emotional well-being. So the concept eventually has evolved into this idea of like being in any kind of relationships. Again, it could be family relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, any kind of relationship where one person is excessively relying on another person for essentially their emotional well-being and their essentially them as a person, right? But it also goes the other way where, and this is what talks about on the screen there as a bidirectional process, is the person that's being dependent on essentially is someone who is also depending on the dependent for their needs to be met as well. And on that end, that person is really wanting to be needed by the other person. Their sense of value, their sense of self, their sense of self-worth is coming from being needed by that dependent, right? And so there's an exchange and interaction that's happening, and that's the pattern of the relationship, right? And so you kind of hear this, sometimes you might hear like, okay, it's a relationship dependency or emotional dependency, or sometimes even obsessive love, right? In romantic relationships where you might see it in movies, but it actually happens in real life too, where someone is depending solely on this other person as their end all be all, right? And if, let's say, the relationship ends, then that's it. They're destroyed, right? And it's not just typical grief and loss at that point. It's more than that. Or sometimes, we might hear some individuals say, if you threaten to leave me, then, I might hurt myself in some way. And those are like extreme, right? Extreme cases. But those do happen, right? And that's kind of where codependency takes an extreme form of dependency in relationships. Whereas in healthy, normal relationships, yeah, we depend on each other, right? We're each other's supports, but we also know who we are apart from our relationships. We have unique selves apart from the relationship itself. And so that's just a little bit like a really brief overview about what codependency is. And I'm gonna turn the table over to Dr. Pines to talk about just more in depth about where codependency comes from and where it stems from. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. So we're going to move on talking about the contributing factors that may lead people into codependent relationships. And it's important to kind of keep in mind that a lot of these are broad themes. A lot of these share overlapping traits. And none of them are, one-to-one direct cause and effect. They're all things that, may contribute. So we start with early childhood trauma, and those are the kind of environments where kids growing up in dangerous, chaotic environments, even if it's just the relationships that are dangerous and chaotic, that can lead to constant need for approval from others. And that leads people to staying in relationships even if they're toxic. Because if you think about children with their parents, if their parents are unsafe people, the children still depend on them, and so they become kind of attuned to depending on unsafe people, and that extends to their home environment. If they are chaotic, unpredictable, emotionally or mentally neglectful, unsafe or blaming, shaming, critical, those things can lead you to believe that you don't matter. And then that sets up the template for your relationships as a teenager or as an adult. Insecure attachment styles. So for those of you who don't know, attachment styles are a really useful concept. It describes a person's way of relating to the other people in their lives, in their relationships. Healthy attachment styles. The attachment styles are where people feel free to depend on people, but also are capable of standing on their own 2 feet. And the insecure attachment styles, they're typified by people who are intensely afraid of abandonment or afraid of intimacy. And if that is kind of instilled in you growing up, those tend to stay with you throughout your life, unless you put in a lot of work, in either forming very strong, healthy relationships, or in therapy, or other kinds of personal growth avenues. And so one of the things that when that happens is you can't count on anyone to be there for you, which leads to a lot of anxiety. If your parental or caregivers were inconsistent or intentionally harmful, that leads to a lot of insecurity and believing that you don't matter, or believing that you're the problem. And as a result, sometimes people become caretakers, like taking care of parents who aren't able to take care of themselves, or taking care of siblings, and then they don't learn to take care of themselves. And an alternative to that is you can become very controlling. In a very chaotic and unsafe environment, people sometimes respond by trying to control everything. And then another way to think about it is just parenting styles. There's a few different broad categories for parenting styles. And these always confuse me, but authoritative is the good one. Authoritarian is the sort of dictatorship one. And then permissive is parents who really just allow anything to go. And then the last one is just neglect or uninvolved. And so obviously neglect is bad, but permissive, neglectful, or authoritarian parenting styles, they kind of don't give kids the chance to learn to be independent. They don't give kids the chance to learn how to feel safe in relationships. And that leads to difficulty with the kids growing up as teenagers and adults, forming their own healthy relationships. And the last one is identity development. And that's just, like we were talking about, in adolescence and young adulthood, you're juggling a lot of different life tasks. There's a lot of personal growth, especially in the teenage years, lots of personal growth happening very quickly. And some of those are in regards to your personal identity development, and some of those are in regards to where you fit in the world, in your community, in your families, and in your relationships. And things can just get mixed up when those two things are happening so fast. There's so much growth happening so fast, and things can get just kind of mixed up where your identity gets tied up within the relationship. And that is some of the ways that, and this is not a complete list, but these are some of the ways that people can develop into codependent relationships. And so here we have a lot of examples of codependency, and we welcome your own observations, your own contributions, or for examples of codependency. If you've heard about it, seen it in TVs or movies, or your own relationships or your friends, although we'd want to caution you to not share too much personal information, because this is not a confidential setting, and we're just doing an educational presentation. So we can start with being overly reliant on others for your emotional well-being. And you'll see, like, a lot of these examples, sort of, one of the things that characterizes them is there's a lack of balance. And so if you're overly dependent on your partner, or a friend, but if you're overly dependent on them for well-being, it makes it hard to balance a healthy relationship. And it might lead to you feeling like you can't competently solve your own problems, you can't self-soothe and self-regulate, and overcompensating for being emotionally neglected at a young age. And sort of on the other side of that spectrum is feeling responsible for other people's well-being. That's feeling like you are the the savior or the caretaker for them, even if it's at the expense of your own well-being. And that leads to similarly just imbalance, where you might feel like your primary value is when you are needed and when you can solve someone else's problem. And then that just leads to not focusing on yourself. It could be having a hard time identifying your own emotions and needs. A lot of times, if you're preoccupied with other people's needs and emotions, you might be very tuned into other people for their needs and feelings, and you're very good at caretaking and being responsive, but have just be completely out of practice paying attention to your own emotions or needs. And a lot of times that's tied in with not believing that your needs are valid or that your needs are healthy, or feeling like your needs might be too much of a burden. Then you've got difficulty making decisions because of the impact on the other person. And that's an important one where balance comes into play as well, because of course, if you're in a relationship, you want to take the other person's considerations or the impact that your choices will have. You want to be considerate of how your choices will impact the other person. But there needs to be some balance where you have the freedom to do what's best for you, whether that's talking about what classes you're taking, what friends you hang out with, where you live, where you work, lots of other things, where having the balance between my needs and your needs and the needs of our relationship are kind of all being considered. Where are we? Always putting others' needs before your own. And that's kind of similar, like if you get stuck in being a caretaker, in being a savior, you're out of balance and you're going to struggle taking care of yourself because you're always putting other people's needs first. Sometimes people get drawn into this trap by kind of continually thinking that if I can take care of my partner and just get them in the right frame of mind, then they'll be able to be there for me and meet my needs, and so it's constantly kind of pushing it back and delaying your own needs. Another example is a difficulty saying no, difficulty setting boundaries. And this is a very common one. A lot of people have challenges with this because, sorry, hang on just a sec. Sorry about that. Package. Oh, okay, I'm good. Package just got delivered. Sorry. Okay. Difficulty saying no. It can be really scary saying no and setting boundaries. But if you don't do that, then you are you're kind of like a variety of options. You might be kind of like being a doormat, being very submissive, getting yourself into unhealthy situations or situations that really don't align with your values and morals and priorities or what's best for you, because you're not saying no, you're not setting boundaries in service of maintaining a relationship. Next, we have denying personal sense of control over your situation. And that's kind of feeling like the other person is to blame or at fault or in control for whatever's happening. And it's sort of like a lack of accountability, a lack of responsibility on your part, because you're more focused on the other person. Giving more than receiving in a relationship is a lot like some of these others, where there's just not enough balance, where one person's needs are taking priority over the other one in a significant way. And if you find yourself in that situation, you're not taking care of yourself. You are prioritizing the other person's well-being, and as a result, your well-being can suffer. Needing constant reassurance, approval, and validation from others. And that is kind of like being insecure. Constantly asking for reassurance, like, do you love me? Are you mad at me? Are you going to leave me? And that's kind of insecurity, low self-esteem, low self-worth, where you're not really sure if you're bringing anything of value to the relationship, and you're afraid that the other person is going to leave. Lacking trust in your own feelings, thoughts, and decisions is also kind of lack of confidence, insecurity, and a fear that if you make a mistake, then others will give up on you or abandon you. And it leads to intense unhelpful pressure to get it right and to meet everyone else's needs. No identity separation from the relationship. We talked about that a little bit, is not knowing yourself, not knowing what your values are, not knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are outside of your relationship, because you've been overly focused on developing and maintaining the relationship and not focused enough on your own personal development. Another example of codependency is avoiding conflict at all cost. And that's similar to difficulty saying no, not setting boundaries. It's kind of like walking on eggshells. A lot of people can kind of imagine what that's like, that you're afraid that any little thing that you do will create a conflict that will push the other person away. And so no matter what, you give in and give them what they want. And of course, that is unbalanced and leads to you not getting what you want because you're afraid the other person will leave you. Doing anything to hang on to relationships at all cost, even if it is unsafe or self-destructive. People do this sometimes because they don't believe they can live life alone. So they'll do anything, even if it compromises their well-being or their values. And lastly, feeling lonely or unsatisfied without a relationship. Everybody might feel this way to some extent, but it's the degree, the severity for people who are I don't want to say codependent, but have traits of codependency or have been in codependent relationships, is this extreme loneliness, unhappiness, lack of satisfaction, lack of meaning in life. For those people, when the relationship ends, it's much more severe than just, oh, well, it didn't work out. We're going our separate ways. Did we have some comments? Possibly someone only getting emotional support from one person, e.g. best friend or significant other, instead of creating or growing a strong support network with more than one person. That's a great point. And that's actually something that that in abusive relationships, the abuser, and it's a slightly different topic, but the abuser will kind of cut off the other person in their relationship from any of the other support that person might have, to force them to be dependent on them. And that's, again, yeah, unbalanced and unhealthy. Related to the do anything to hang on to relationships at all cost, sometimes people are so dependent on the other person that they're willing to suffer at the hands of their partner because they think they deserve that treatment and need to just accept it so their partner doesn't leave them. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times those people might feel like, well, this is the best I can get. Who else would want me? Or I don't believe that I have value as a person. So yeah, this is what I deserve. And that is very unhealthy and sad. Stockholm syndrome affects victim, where victim thinks their whole world is the abuser. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you guys for those examples.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Pines, for all those wonderful examples. So let's move on to talking about how to break the cycle a little bit. And all of these things that are listed here definitely aren't exhaustive. They aren't going to solve all of the issues in codependent relationships. And at the end of the day, we're always going to promote seeking out your own support if you feel like you're struggling with mental health issues or codependency in relationships, that you seek support, whether it's going to individual therapy, couples therapy, whatever it is. At the end of the day, that's probably the best way you can really get to know yourself and get to know how you contribute to your relationships, how your relationships affect you, and so on and so forth. But these are just some ideas here for you guys. So first and foremost is really getting to know who you are apart from your relationships, right? We've been talking about that whole idea of who are you apart from these relationships that you have that are kind of like your whole world, right? And so it takes a lot of introspection, takes a lot of self-reflection, and it's really just figuring out your own sense of self. So sometimes what I like to do with some of my clients is tell them to take out a piece of paper and a writing utensil and just put it in the middle like a little bubble. I am Teresa, right? ... And then have like those, those brainstorming bubbles coming out of it, and just start brainstorming all the different things that you can think about that represent you as a unique individual. So sometimes it's the roles that we play in life, like psychologist, right? Daughter, wife, mother, whatever it is, right? So thinking of all the different roles that you could possibly play in your life, thinking about the different values and goals that you have in life. Like, I do value relationships, my relationships, right? I value friends, family. I value quality time with people. I value going outdoors and being in nature. I value traveling. I value my work, right? Like all of these things. And what are your goals? What are some of those goals that you have related to those values, right? That you really want to fulfill, that will really give your life some more meaning, right? And what are some of your interests, your hobbies, your strengths, things that you enjoy doing, right? What are those things? And really writing those things down. What makes up the cultural aspect about yourself, right? Do you identify as he, she, they, right? Or do you identify as bisexual, pansexual, heterosexual? What is that? Are you a religious person? Do you have an ethnic background, right? I'll say that I'm Vietnamese American. I was born in the US, but I have immigrant parents, right? All of these things make up who you are, separate from your relationships, right? It's very different. And so it's really getting to know you as a unique individual, as a separate person. And sometimes um, we don't think about these things unless someone maybe prompts us to, like right now, right? Or if you're in therapy and you're actually reflecting on these things. Sometimes we do. Sometimes there are people who are very introspective and they journal and they write these things down, but a lot of times we don't really actively think about or write down or reflect on these parts that make us, right? And so that's one step to help a little bit. Establishing your own values and goals. And I kind of talked about that a little bit. So figuring out what are the priorities you have in your life, meaning what are the things that are most important to you. It doesn't have to just be your relationships or your work. Like, what are things that, are personal characteristic traits that you really want to embody, right? Like helping other people or giving back, things like that. And then knowing what your values are and then establishing goals to really live out those values, right? And then finding, like if you say, for example, your value is, let's say education, for example, and your long-term value would be to graduate college, right? And then, you start to identify 3 short-term steps or just steps in general that you can take to attain that long-term goal, right? It might be like I'm going to visit my academic advisor, once a month, or as often as I need to make sure that I'm on track, making sure that I'm actually studying and getting my homework and assignments in on time, right? So that I actually get good grades. Maybe it's taking like a career assessment or something to really identify like what is it that I'm good at and what is it that I really like and that I can see myself doing in the long run, right? Maybe it's because I need to change my major, things like that, where your values essentially, whatever you find important, leads to certain goals that you might set for yourself. And those goals essentially need to be accomplished by like little steps at a time, right? And again, these ideas are to help you, again, separate yourself from your relationships a little so you get to know you and what you want for yourself in life, right? Identifying your strengths, positive qualities, hobbies, and interests. Also, kind of talked a little bit about that, right? Sometimes maybe we've really enjoyed doing certain things in the past that we don't do anymore. If you're interested in establishing those activities or interests and hobbies again, go for it, right? Or if there are things that you have always wanted to do and you haven't been able to do yet, go for those, right? Or just mastering certain skills that you already have, right? Playing the guitar or a certain sport or whatever it is getting to know you in a way of what are the things that I like? What are the things that really help me get my creative juices going? What are those things that really allow me to be my own unique person, right? And then learning how to self-soothe and self-validate. This is a really important one, as Dr. Pines was talking about earlier, where sometimes we don't feel confident in making our own decisions, or we're not certain of our own emotions, our own thoughts, and because we're often focused on someone else, right? So the idea is the more that you can acknowledge your own emotions, your own thoughts, your own experiences, the more you get to know yourself, the more you get to know who am I as a person, what are the things that make me tick, what are the things that make me happy, right? I could say, like one simple validating statement to myself is, I am really sad. I'm really bummed out that my friend canceled on me this weekend. Or I'm really disappointed and really upset that I didn't get into the college that I wanted to. Or I'm really excited because I get to actually take a trip this summer when, all of last year we weren't able to take any trips anywhere, right? Things like that, where all you're simply doing is acknowledging and reflecting back what your experience is at any given moment. And again, what that does is really boosts the sense of certainty in what it is that you're going through so that you're more confident in yourself, right? And knowing your boundaries and setting them. Also, Dr. Pines was talking about this, where a lot of times it's hard to say no. A lot of times we're people pleasers in codependent relationships, right? And we want to be able to give the other person what they need, but then we neglect ourselves and we don't honor what it is that we need in the relationship. So if it's taking time to take care of yourself, whether it's setting aside 1 to 2 hours on a weekend, or 30 minutes a day, do that, right? Because if your goal is to be there for other people, then you have to be there for yourself first in order to be your best self, to be there for people, right? And so it's really being able to, again, get in touch with yourself, and that you're not making the relationship everything. You're also getting to know you. You're also getting to say no when you're uncomfortable with something, and really putting in the effort to hold that boundary, because it can be easy to give in, right? We don't want to upset someone else. We don't want to hurt someone else. We don't want the other person to leave us. But the idea of breaking the cycle is maintaining healthy relationships while still exerting and asserting our own needs, right? Our needs are just as important as the other person's. Checking in with yourself regularly. So I usually say that this is one of the best things that you can do for yourself, and it's a mindfulness practice. So a lot of times we do this with our teens and our young adults here, is asking them 3 check-in questions at the beginning of every program day, at the end of every program day. Is 1, what's your distress level this current moment on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 10 being super high, like I'm not okay in this moment. 1 being I'm perfectly calm, I'm perfectly chill, right? The second thing is, what am I feeling in this moment? What's my current mood? And then the third thing is, what do I need in this moment? So for me, in this moment, I'm at maybe like a 4. I'm feeling a little nervous, but also excited. And I need water because my throat, I've been talking for a while and my throat is dry, right? So again, the idea is, you're recognizing and you're acknowledging, you're validating where you're at any given moment. So you're getting to know yourself a little bit better, right? You're getting to know what irks you, what makes you nervous, what makes you anxious, what makes you overwhelmed, what makes you happy, what makes you joyful. And then at the same time, you're also honoring your own needs. You're tuning to and you're attending to what it is that you need to give yourself in that moment to then be your best self, essentially, right? And then the last thing I would encourage you guys to do, like I said actually in the beginning of this slide, is to work on the deeper attachment issues. Work on those things that, because codependency is more deeply rooted, right? Like these patterns don't just develop, or they're not just present out of nowhere. They develop over time, and these traits that we have, these patterns of thinking and feeling and being and responding in our relationships are co-occurring, right? Like they're what do we call it? Like we often co-regulate our relationships, right? We co-create our relationships. And so really going to individual therapy, if you haven't done so already, and really getting to know yourself, digging a little bit deeper. I always like to call the therapy process a place of self-discovery, right? Like you're getting to know yourself on a level that, yeah, sometimes it's really scary. And in the end, it's really beneficial. And the intention is to really understand yourself a little bit better, understand your relationships a little bit better, and improving in all those areas, right? So we just had a comment here. Let me check it real quick. Shout out to the individual therapy resources at Saddleback College. Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any other ideas? This is your opportunity to put in the chat box any other ideas on how maybe you've broken a cycle. And again, the idea is not necessarily to break off a relationship if that's not necessarily what you want to do, whether it's a friendship, romantic relationship, family relationship, unless like it's really, that negatively impacting to you and it's detrimental to you. But the idea is really to maintain a healthy relationship and getting to know yourself apart from it and really having that balance, as Dr. Pines was saying. So any other thoughts, you guys, before we move on to the next slide?
Just in case they're still typing, there was a question from Christine. She wants to know if the slides will be available and is this being recorded so that for future use?
Yeah, so we are currently recording. Sorry, I don't think I mentioned that in the very beginning. We're currently live recording, and we're going to put it on YouTube, and I will send this. If you guys type in Vibe Mission Hospital, you'll see it posted on there probably by the end of the week. So the slides will be on here, obviously. And then I can try to also email you guys out the slides, or not the slides, the video as well. But easiest way is probably just to search on YouTube, Vibe Mission Hospital. Okay. Let's see. We have a few comments here. Being mindful of the discomfort that comes from expressing my needs and setting boundaries. Yeah, it's super uncomfortable. Especially if we're people pleasers, we don't want to do that because of so many different fears that we have about how it would impact the relationship, right? And so again, if you can validate that for yourself and honor that doesn't feel good, and at the same time, it's probably in your best interest if you do it, right? So you can balance those two opposite feelings at the same time. Cecilia says, I'm from Sweden, so seriously check out the Stockholm Syndrome for real and a big deal. Correct. I broke a cycle by starting with someone broke a cycle by starting. Sorry, my motion sensor light is, there you go. I broke a cycle by starting with something concrete. I told the person I could listen and support anytime before 9 p.m. But after then, I needed to just start relaxing before bed. Just setting a simple boundary helps a lot. That's great. Yeah, something very concrete like, hey, this is my limit for the day, and I need to also move on with myself. It sounds like you put it a lot more nicely, though. A therapeutic healing separation can be helpful to create space and time to each work on our issues with the goal of coming back together in a healthier state. Correct. I 100% agree with that one. What common thoughts, reasons are normalized in the young adult community that prevent the breaking of the codependent cycle? Oh, that's a good question, Lisa. And I would actually put that back on a lot of the young adults that are in this webinar currently. So the question again was, what are common thoughts and reasons that are normalized in the young adult community that prevent the breaking the cycle of codependent cycle? Sorry, I think I just said that word a few times. We'll come back to that one. And then expanding your social network is so important for this. Having other people in your life can help lessen your codependency on someone and also help you realize your own self-worth in the process. Yes, casting a wider social network, not necessarily like having a huge quantity of friends, but the quality of friends in your life, right? Yeah, more people that you can trust, that are sincere and genuine, that are supporting you in a way that, again, is not dependent or codependent, but you all are each your own unique individuals contributing to that relationship, right? The pandemic quarantine helped me to distance from those that depended so much on me. Now that we are reconnecting, it's easier for me to say no. Nice. So time again, right? Building a support system outside of the other person in the relationship, whether it be family, friends, support groups. Yeah, again, having a good support network is really important. Okay. Um, Dr. Pines, any thoughts or ideas on this question that Lisa posed? Common
Oh, about a common, oh, where did it go?
thoughts, reasons that are normalized in young adults that prevent breaking the codependent cycle.
I think, especially for teenagers, the peer connections are very, idealized and perhaps overvalued. And of course, friends and peers and are important, but sometimes, especially in some subcultures, they can be, that's seen as pretty much everything and the most important thing. And that does tend to kind of decrease in intensity as people get out of their teenage years. But I think that's a big one.
Yeah,
Um,
I would
yeah.
agree with that one. And um, you were also speaking about culture. I know there's a lot of cultures that are very what we call like collectivistic, right? Collectivistic cultures that really depend on each other. It's more of like community thinking rather than individual thinking. Not like one for myself. I'm doing everything for myself, but everything I do rather is for everyone else, right? And so sometimes that could be the case as well, where that's just something we were raised to do, or our way of being. Um, yeah, but I would definitely agree with what you said, Dr. Pines, is that this age, like relationships are everything, and so it's definitely hard to pull ourselves away. And again, like what we were saying in the beginning, is if we don't really know ourselves very well yet, know what our purpose in life is, all those like existential questions that we're not necessarily supposed to know and figure out yet, even. But we kind of get lost in those codependent patterns because we don't necessarily know ourselves that well yet, and the relationship is like our one entity that represents our identity, right, in some way. So yeah, if anybody else has any other thoughts to that, go ahead and add that. But we're gonna, just for the sake of time, we're gonna keep going to the last slide here.
All right. So now the fun part. We get to talk about healthy relationship characteristics, which are delightful. So we can start off at the top with mutual respect. And that just means valuing, each person valuing who the other is, and respecting their boundaries, respecting their space, their personal space, their level of comfort in different situations. Just respect. It helps build trust. And then safety, and that's something that in a relationship you co-create for one another, is creating the safety to be vulnerable, and that being vulnerable is a safe thing for you to do in that relationship. Honesty is another key component of that, because it builds trust and strengthens the relationship and goes hand in hand with safety. Compromise is another big one in a relationship. Nobody gets their way all the time, and so there's, I guess I like to say balance, but you got to have balance in who gets their way. And everyone should acknowledge the other person's point of view, respect their point of view, and be willing to give and take. Individuality, speaking of balance again, is neither partner should have to compromise who they are, and their individual identity should not be based on their partner or their relationship. Each should have the safety and the flexibility to continue seeing their friends and doing the things that they love to do. and being supportive of their partner for wanting to try new things or make new friends. Good communication is a very broad category, but each partner should be able to speak openly and honestly, seeking to correct miscommunications when they inevitably happen. And if one person needs time and space to sort their feelings out before they talk about it, the other partner should respect those wishes and wait until their partner is ready to talk. Anger control is really important, goes back to respect and safety and communication, but we all get angry. And so how you express your anger can have a huge effect on your relationships with other people. Anger can be handled in healthy ways, such as taking deep breaths, counting to 10, or talking about what's making you angry, as opposed to acting, impulsively on anger. And then related to that is fighting fair. Just like everybody gets angry, everyone in relationships will argue and disagree and step on each other's toes at some point. But what separates healthy from unhealthy relationships is when you are fighting, when you are disagreeing, when someone does hurt you, you're able to kind of do it fairly, stick to the subject at hand, avoid insulting people, and kind of like remembering that you're on the same team. So you work together to find a solution rather than one person trying to beat the other person in an argument. And of course, timeouts. That's a big part of fighting fair, and there's a whole neuroscience lecture about this that we don't have time for, but taking timeouts is really important. When one person's angry, you're not going to have a productive conversation. So you take a timeout, you go listen to some music, take a walk, or do some breathing until you have sort of calmed down enough to re-engage in a healthy, productive way. And then everyone needs to respect that if someone needs a timeout. Problem solving is just working together, being able to be kind of like teammates against a problem rather than opponents. Responsibility is taking personal responsibility for your own behaviors and emotions. And that's a really important part of healthy boundaries, is being able to be responsible and accountable for your own feelings and your own actions, and not being responsible for your partner's feelings and actions. Understanding. Each partner should take time to understand what the other might be feeling, what their opinions are, what their reactions were all about. And that takes time and patience. And lastly, self-confidence. When dating partners have confidence in themselves, it can help their relationships with others. It shows that they are calm, comfortable, and mature enough to allow others to express their opinions without forcing their opinions on their own opinions on them, and just being confident that what you're bringing to the relationship is valuable and worthwhile and worthy of love and respect, and that helps you not overextend. And I think that's wonderful. My internet connection's unstable. I hope I wasn't frozen through all that. Okay. Anyone else have a few minutes left? Oh, good. Thank you, Kate. Other traits of healthy relationships that you guys can think of?
And just as comments are coming through, I forgot to mention earlier on my slide when I was talking about different like if we're thinking of our own values and our own strengths and things like that, if you guys are curious, you guys can Google like a free values self-assessment online as well, and there's like plenty out there just for fun, you know, and or if you're curious, and sometimes it'll come up with a lot of things that narrow down really like what you find most important in life, and so that could be a fun way for you guys to start some of these ideas as well. But okay.
Yeah. If someone has a codependent friend, what are your suggestions to address how to break the cycle? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's hard because what I found is that when friends provide suggestions to another friend that's in a codependent relationship, it's really tricky. It's hard for that codependent person or whoever's in that codependent relationship to receive the, you know, supportive, what is it, constructive criticism, or, you know, encouragements to, you know, hey, let's be mindful of these patterns that are happening in your relationship, you know, and things like that. So I would just kind of just kindly support and say, okay, that sounds like, you know, a lot of validating and reflecting back what they're sharing with you is not necessarily giving them advice, but kind of letting them hear what they're sharing with you, you know, in a way. And so if they're saying like, oh my gosh, you know, my boyfriend did this, and this, or, you know, whatever it is that they're sharing with you, is that you're able to simply reflect that back. You're kind of paraphrasing or simply summarizing what they're telling you and saying like, that sounds really frustrating, or that sounds like, I don't know, like that sounds a little sketch, or, you know, whatever it is, that you're simply validating whatever they're feeling and reflecting what they're saying back to you, so that you're kind of like a soundboard, and you're sometimes when someone says it out loud, they're not necessarily realizing what they're saying until it's reflected back to them. So I would say it's hard to give any kind of advice to someone who's in that relationship. You can definitely try. You can definitely try and kind of just recognize that, you know, that there are certain patterns and traits that you are worried for your friend about. Whether they'll listen to you or not, that's, you know, we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say simple reflection to kind of have them hear back what they're telling you. Sometimes it can be surprising to them.
Yeah. I would say I would say pretty much the same thing. Step one is realizing that you can't really do anything about it. It really has to come from the person who is in the relationship. But the best thing that you can do is be supportive, um, gently provide information or feedback if the other person is willing to hear it, and then just yeah, reflections. But that's a tough one because yeah, you know, you can always see these patterns much more clearly in other people than you can for yourself. So it's, you know, it's something we all see. Okay, is morals the same as respect? I kind of use morals and values interchangeably. There probably is some difference, but I think respect is a moral or a value. You know, one of many morals and values are, you know, the sort of pillars and concepts that we believe in, um, you know, that are, you know, kind of ethical. That's a question for philosophy, I think. But respect, yeah, is a value and a moral. Okay, healthy relationship characteristics: persevering, love, and forgiveness / repair. Yeah, so persevering love, I think that sounds like kind of describing how, for a relationship to work out, both partners need to be willing to work at it, because relationships are not set it and forget it. They are things that you have to continually work on and evaluate, what's working and what's not working, and do more of what's working and less of what's not working. And both people need to be willing to do that reflection and work. And then forgiveness is important, because as I mentioned, you will step on other people's toes, and they will step on your toes, emotionally, metaphorically, hopefully not literally. And when that happens, you got to work through it. Good communication, honesty, respect, and forgiveness. Yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna say, jump in real quick and say,
Yeah.
persevering love to me sounds also like um, committing, commitment, basically, committing to be committed in a way. Yeah, no
Yeah.
matter what. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And validating each other's emotions and feelings. Yeah, that's being a good person doing that. Like, absolutely. You want your partner to listen empathically and to accept and validate your feelings. They don't have to necessarily agree with you or feel the same as you, but they need to, validate your the way you're feeling. And patience, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Teresa.
Yes. Well, that is basically all we have, but we have just that one last slide that we put on most of our webinars at the very end about community resources. So I linked here our phone number for the VIBE program that I mentioned to you guys earlier, just for young adults ages 18 to 26 that need more support than just once a week, like 1 hour a week therapy. So in our program, we see more moderate to severe levels of anxiety and depression. So we support these individuals 3 to 5 times a week, just really depending on what they're needing. And then I put here other community resources. So like I believe the Family Resource Center, Hidden Strengths, Behavioral Health, as well as the Wellness Center South have these different like life skills workshops or skill building groups and workshops that could be helpful for young adults. Western Youth Services has mental health services, low fee for up to age 21. OCA, PICA, I believe that's, I always butcher this and I'm sorry. And Nikki, if you're on here, you could always chime in. Orange County Asian Pacific Islander, I forget what the last two letters stand for, but they provide free counseling and case management services as well, which is always really helpful for young adults that don't have the money to go to therapy. And then there's the three other, like the Domestic Violence Hotline, Child Protective Services, and the National Suicide Prevention Hotline there for you guys as well. So just for the sake of time, we're going about 5 minutes over. So I just wanted to really thank everybody for joining us today. Be on the lookout for an email for the registration for the next webinar on August 11th. I'll probably send that out within a week or two. And then also, again, check back to the YouTube Vibe Mission Hospital channel. I'll probably post the video up by Friday, so you guys can find that there and send it to whoever you feel like could benefit. And let me just check the chat box real quick.
Community Alliance is what the CA stands for. Thanks to
Perfect.
Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, perfect. So thank you guys all so much. I'm going to click out of the webinar so you guys can do the survey. And then hopefully you guys win a $25 gift card for Amazon.